Hello YouTube, this is the day after the drawer glue up video and the runners. Today we're going to go over pre-finishing of the entire project today. Everything to 220 grit, prepping it for the finishing stages, which I am going to cover in the end of this video. So with that said, let's get to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 120 grit sandpaper and I'm going to sand down the drawer, removing any glue stains or pencil marks left over from the last time. And then I'm going to work it up to 220 grit to get it ready for finishing. For the step stool itself, I'm going to do the same process and get it all the way up to 220 grit. With that said, let's get to it. And do the final sanding for the entire project. Then I'm going to tape it off and then we're going to start talking about finishing. So let's do it. Now one thing I want to add is I want to make sure that the holes line up so that I get the maximum amount of suction as I'm sanding. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my air compressor and I'm going to blow off all the parts and then we're going to start talking about the finish. So let's get to it. So one thing I forgot to mention is we're also going to need to cut in real quick a notch so that the drawer will sit flush. So what I did was I took my dovetail saw and I cut on an angle here exactly how much I want, how much I need for this drawer face to go flush to the surface. And then I'll come over the top now with a chisel. So let me go grab that. Now let's see how it fits. Perfect. So, pre-finishing the entire project, including the drawer, and now we're just going to go into finishing the step stool itself. So I'm going to go from right to left about some of the products that are on the table. Just to talk over them, benefits, cons. We are going to try to use as many of these as possible on our project, just to give you an idea of how different finishes go on our project and how to show off different woods on your project itself. So with that said, let's get to it. So over on the right here we have some spray oil-based polyurethane. So what's nice about a spray polyurethane is that there's no cleanup, so there's no brushes to worry about, and it goes on quick and it dries quick. So the dry time is probably the fastest out of all of these. So again, if you want to do small projects or parts where you can't really get a brush in real well, I recommend using a spray polyurethane. Next is a wipe-on polyurethane, which is also very quick to dry. Even though it's an oil-based, what you do with a wipe-on is you can either brush it on with a foam brush, or I like to use old t-shirts, so obviously clean t-shirts, so you have to run them through the wash before you wipe them on your project. But you can cut up old t-shirts and use them as a rag for wiping on that kind of polyurethane. I'm actually going to reverse this. So the next fastest drying would be water-based polyurethane. And the nice thing about water-based polyurethane is you can wash your brushes with water, whereas, again, if you're going to clean your brush on an oil-based finish in any capacity, you're going to need to use mineral spirits. All right? You can't use water. Whereas water-based finish, again, they have the odor is a lot less, it's a lot easier to finish inside, and it has the quickest drying time. It's normally our go-to finish. The differences between oil and water is, again, it will change the color. So if I'm finishing pine, one part of pine in water-based and another in oil-based, they will not look the same. All right? So again, I got to keep that in mind. This is Danish oil. And Danish oil is a little bit different than polyurethane. It's a stain, so it changes the color, and it's a finish. So basically, when you wipe it onto a project enough times, it will create a clear protective coat which keeps water out and keeps the color in, and also prevents moisture. But again, you have to coat it in multiple layers. Now another thing too, a nice thing about Danish oil is it's a penetrating finish. So basically, polyurethane, since we're talking about coats here, a top coat is basically, this is polyurethane, it will sit on top of the wood. It won't go into the wood, it'll just sit on top. That's what a top coat's called. A penetrating finish will actually go into the cells themselves, so into the wood cells, and start to fill them up with finish. That's why you have to gradually stack Danish oil over and over and over to get that nice clean finish. And even if you scratch some of that off the top, there's still finish in the project to keep it safe. So when you scratch polyurethane off of, let's just say, a tabletop, you can actually see the natural wood underneath. Whereas if you used a penetrating finish, if you made a scratch on the top, you still wouldn't get to the actual wood. There'd still be finish there. Now, these are all finishes. So basically, these will cover your project and protect your project. But moving on to stain. Stain is a color enhancement. So basically it allows you to change the color of the wood or change the characteristics of the wood, but it is by no means a finish. Right? There are stain finish combos out there where they're basically 2 in 1, but just for the sake of this video, we're just going to talk about stain. So for stain, there are oil and water comparables, but I only have oil in this shop. So to apply oil-based stain and apply it consistently, I like to use, again, an old t-shirt or rag compared to a brush, because I find I get a more consistent spread of the finish, so there's less dripping and less blotches as I am putting finish on the project itself. Now, one other key thing is, for all of these, your project needs to have been sanded within the first couple days. Needs to have been sanded within the last couple days, because again, if you go to put finish on a project that's been sitting for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the ability for the finish to adhere to the project goes down. So the closer you do your pre-finishing to your finishing, the better your coat adhesion will be. So basically, the better it will stick. Last can I have here is a can of primer. So again, like all of these, you can paint your project. All right? It's not recommended when you're doing it over an expensive wood. So I wouldn't do it over oak, cherry, maple, butternut, walnut. All right? If you're trying to show off the wood, don't buy the expensive wood. All right? Because if you're going to just paint it, it's an absolute waste. Now, if your project completely made out of pine, which one of my projects is for the other course, I want to paint it. So what I'll do is I'll prime it and then I'll put an oil-based, or I'm sorry, a water-based paint with a gloss over it, and that'll be my color changer and my finish. So it'll protect the wood from water, and it'll also change the wood from a wood look to an actual color itself. So again, finish itself comes in many different forms. I only just barely scratched the surface. There are many different types of products out there when it comes to finish, like epoxy, shellac, French polish, but for this project I'm only going to show you what I have. Now, quick tips in addition to what I covered is vessels. Right? You should never be dipping your brush into the can and then taking it out. Right? Because again, you can contaminate the finish and ruin the quality. So the cheapest way is use your takeout containers. So whenever you get Chinese food, Thai food, whatever takeout, take the plastic containers and run them through the dishwasher, making sure that they're clean, and you can use these vessels as trays for your finish. Another one too is after birthday parties, you can use all those spare cups you have as vessels as well. So again, I don't recommend you taking your brushes and dipping them into the can themselves. It's not a good idea. I would always have a separate vessel for those parts. Another tip, again, rags make great finishing tools. So they're great at pulling sawdust off your project, and then you can throw them in the wash, or you can use them for staining. Now, here's my warning when it comes to staining. When you are staining with oil-based finish, whether it be polyurethane or you're staining or changing the color, you must dry the rag outside until it is completely hard. Then, once it is completely hardened, you may throw it away. A good example of this is linseed oil. If you don't let the rags dry out, they will combust and they will catch the can or the receptacle on fire. So this is my big warning to you guys. Again, if you're using rags for finish, you must air dry them to complete hardness before you start to throw them away. Again, just don't ever throw wet rags, whether it be oil finish or linseed oil, in the trash. It is not a good idea. Other safety things, again, gloves are a must when you're doing finish. Water-based is not as critical, and when it comes to aerosolized as well, there's no way you'll have contact with the wood itself. But if you're doing a white bond finish, oil finish, penetrating finish, or a stain, you should wear gloves, because again, each of these finishes can seep into your skin, and they're just not good for your health. Won't kill you, but not recommended. The other thing too is when you're finishing, if you can, try to finish either outside or a well-ventilated area. One thing you want to ensure is that when you put finish on a project, you want to cover it with some sort of plywood or tarp, obviously making sure it doesn't touch it. This ensures that any ambient dust or pollen in the area does not land on your project and contaminate the finish. Lastly, all the cutoffs, especially in a small shop that I made, I hang on to. The reason being is each one of these is actually a piece of my actual project, and what I could do is I can do test staining. So what I can do is I can put a little bit of finish on here, see how it looks, stain this part, see how it looks, without wasting any additional wood. So what you would consider scrap or your throwaway materials, hang on to them so you can see how they look when you start to change the color of your materials. So with that said, next week we're going to actually start getting into putting finish on this project and talking about how to tape off different parts to get different aesthetics. So with that said, I hope everyone's having a great week, and I'll see you later.